I'm delighted and honoured to introduce our keynote speaker today, Maha Bali, Professor of Practice at the Centre for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. Maha will be speaking on critical AI literacies. Maha has a PhD in education from the University of Sheffield in the UK. She's co-founder of virtuallyconnecting.org, a grassroots movement that challenges academic gatekeeping at conferences, and also co-facilitator of Equity Unbound, an equity-focused, open, connected, intercultural learning curriculum, which has also branched into academic community activities, continuity with care, socially just academia, a collaboration with 1HE, community building resources. She writes and speaks frequently about social justice, critical pedagogy, and open and online education. Over the last year, she's published on generative AI in learning and teaching, including blog articles, learning and teaching activities, and refereed papers. The EdTech magazine, focused on higher education, identified her as one of 30 higher ed IT influencers to follow in 2023. I first came across Maha's blog a year ago when we were rapidly developing our initial support resources in generative AI and starting to draft policy and guidance. I found Maha's blogs posts thoughtful and thought-provoking and really helpful in this work, and subsequently also including her papers and example learning activities, some of which you'll see later in today's session. Her latest paper, co-authored with Gupta, Artif and Mills, is Assistant, Parrot or Colonizing Loudspeaker. Her most recent blog post, just released a couple of days ago, entitled On Being Brave Enough to Be Bad While Learning Crochet, is fascinating. Also does touch on AI. And actually, I learned what frogging is. Due to a technical issue, we missed recording the first minute or so of Maha's presentation.
Talk about metaphors as an approach to critical AI literacy, which is one of the papers I co-authored recently. Suggest a framework for critical AI literacies, which I'm kind of still solidifying, and I'll probably publish that on the London School of Economics higher ed blog soon, but you'll get to see parts of it. Give you some resources for critical AI literacy, and then hear back from you again about what you're thinking. And so my first question related to this session is, how do you feel about the latest advances in AI? So I'm gonna, again, stop sharing, go back to Mentimeter, and see what you guys have to say. I'm gonna move on to the next question. It's the same QR code, so I can hide the QR code now. You don't need it again. Just stay there. Feeling mental, okay. Cautious, scary, skeptical, overwhelmed, worried, uncertain, interested, curious, excited, but a bit scared. I think we can be feeling both at the same time. Fascinated, looking forward, apprehensive, unsettled, worried, optimistic, slightly concerned, ignorant, fear, annoying, life-changing, intimidated, threatened. The overwhelmed and excited and curious are all almost equally big. There's optimistic and worried, also relatively big. Uncertain is getting bigger. Optimistic is also there. Fascinated, daunted, unprepared. I think most of us were unprepared. I think Tim just said when ChatGPT came at us, or when AI came at us, it was like, whew, it was a bit shocking. But almost as shocking as the pandemic, honestly, like the way it felt, like all of a sudden, oh no, you have to rethink your teaching, you know? Okay, doubtful, bewildered, catch up with it, someone's saying. Challenged, careful. Wow. Thank you all so much for participating. So I have another question coming up soon. So you can start thinking about the metaphor for AI that you'd use, but I'm going to talk about a few things, but you can keep adding your metaphors as we go. Like I won't be sharing that part of the screen, but the question is there, so you've probably got it on your phone. And while I talk about a few more things. Okay. I'm juggling between sharing Mentimeter and sharing my slides. That's why I keep stopping and pausing. All right, so I love this quote from Margaret Wheatley, and she says, whatever the problem is, community is the answer. And sometimes the community that can support you with something like ChatGPT exists in your own institution, but a lot of times they don't. And I think that's why Tim found me, right, all the way here in Egypt, because we're looking online and I was posting online trying to see who's doing what, who's thinking about it. And I think even within my institution, communities came together to support each other through this new thing. And this emphasis on community is hopefully the only generalization I'll make today. I think a lot of things related to critical AI literacy are very nuanced, and you have to like think about what age group are we talking about, which teachers, where are they, right? When I say critical in critical AI literacy, I mean what Ben Williamson is talking about here is that to recognize that AI is not a neutral technology, it is a political technology, can be used to serve particular policy objectives and ideologies. And by critical, I also mean social justice oriented. And to take a critical approach to AI, I'm focusing on critical AI literacy and saying that it's contextual. Depends who the learners are, depends who the teachers are, depends what their teaching philosophy is, what level. Location makes a huge difference. Think about what else, but it's very nuanced. So, and every little thing I'm going to share, I'm sharing a lot from my own context. I'm trying to say things that I think will be valid for an international audience, but even within one institution, every person may have a slightly different take on how this will work for you. So take from this what works for you, obviously, and you don't have to take every single thing I say. I love this quote, and I think as we start talking about AI, thinking about the heart as centered slightly to the left of our bodies, and the two sacred languages, Arabic and Hebrew, are both written from right to left toward the heart, which, as some have noted, mirrors the purpose of writing, namely to affect the heart. And I think that's really important because AI writing doesn't come from the heart, and for the most part doesn't affect the heart. And I think we still need to remember that there is writing beyond the product of writing that AI produces, which can be useful in non-heart related types of writing, but that there's still a lot that we have to bring as human beings in the process of writing ourselves and in the process of reading someone's writing that comes from someone's heart. And I think there's ways to think about how do we motivate students so that they're doing things they care about, so they don't want to use AI for those things and leave the AI stuff for the other things. I'll come back to this idea again later. To me, the thing when a shock like AI happens is to follow what Adrienne Marie Brown calls intentional adaptation. Remember what our goal is and adapt with that in mind. Rather than scramble and just do whatever, we need to remember what our goal is to begin with and go from there. And so now is the time to see what metaphors for AI you have thought of. So I'm going to go back to Mentimeter, and you've already filled that up. Oh, sorry, let me share the screen. I'm so not used to Microsoft Teams. Zoom is a lot smoother for me, but we're getting there. Right, so I've got a Big Brother, alien invasion, new planet, future, rocket exploding. That's a lot of space metaphors. Black hole, oh my God, lots of space metaphors. I've never seen that before. Were you guys talking about space? Is this image giving you ideas of space like that and parallel universe? Like this is very interesting. Someone said Swiss Army knife. Well, that's a really interesting one. I have not heard that one before. I'm seeing a lot of also robotic and Terminator. I'm seeing business partner, personal assistant, Maze, 24/7, 365 tutor. I like the 365 edition. I'm seeing parrot. I am seeing Stranger Things, which I've not watched those things. I'm seeing medicine. I'm seeing Star Trek, again, the space metaphor. Speeding train, fishing rod, not the fish. Nice, I like that. Crossroads, unknown country, overeager chatterbox. That's a very funny one. Ecosystem, interesting. A knot. I don't understand the knot. I understand the maze. I like the genie one. I think I've heard that one before. It's interesting. It'll do whatever you want, but not necessarily the way you meant it, which is a really good one, I think. A massive wave, giant squid. Yeah, I've heard that one. I can't remember why they used that one, but yeah, I've seen that one before. Midas. Oh, that's a very interesting one. Scaffold, 8 tool. Calculator comes up a lot. Toolkit, takeover. Wow. Pandora's box. I like that. Love Island, Hate to Love. Okay, I've not seen that show either, so not necessarily understanding that one, but lots of pop culture references here. Okay, thank you so much. Those are really lovely. I think we have an article about AI metaphors, and I feel like I always have to keep updating that article with the new metaphors that people share with me. So, the end of loneliness. That is a very interesting one. And someone said the sea. Wow. Matrix. Yeah, my husband wanted me to go watch that movie again. I'm like, I don't want to watch it again. Time Saver, Iceberg, Whirlwind. Very interesting. Okay. I don't know what an Ouroboros is, but I'll look that up later. Hit and miss sometimes. Yeah, I think it definitely is hit and miss sometimes. I'll talk about that soon. Naive Savant. I like Naive Savant. I've heard that one before, I think, and I like it. And someone said artificial as it says already, AI. Future happening now. Someone said dog. That's a very interesting one. Someone said biased. Someone said simplistic, double-edged sword, nuclear, friend. Okay. All right, I will. Ooh, there's still more coming in. I'm sorry if I'm not seeing them all because of the way Mentimeter does it. It just changes the place of everything. Unblocking tool. So this is like when people have a writer's block. That's a good one, I think. What else? Okay. I thank you so much for this, and I will move on to my slides and share with you how we analyzed the use of metaphors for teaching critical AI literacy. So our paper is called Assistant, Parrot, or Colonizing Loudspeaker, ChatGPT Metaphors for Developing Critical AI Literacies. And it was published last month or this month, like recently, on Open Praxis. There are two versions of it. One is the preprint and one is the final version by Anuj Gupta, Yasser Atif, who is an undergraduate student here at AUC, Anna Mills, and myself. And the idea is to think about metaphors and what feelings they evoke. How do they help us understand AI? What kind of perspective does it push the listener to imagine about AI? The metaphors you shared were so completely different from each other, right? And some of the metaphors are helpful and some are harmful. And I'll talk about that as I give some more example. Is it a generally positive or negative view of AI? And in what way does the metaphor showcase like things like accessibility or equity issues related to AI? And how does the metaphor portray the relationship between humans and AI, right? And so analyzing some metaphors, we focused on two key dimensions, even though we looked at a lot of other dimensions, but we ended up creating a chart, which I'll show you. Is it anthropomorphizing, this new word that means, is it making it seem human? And we also looked at Selber's multi-literacies framework. And is it functional, as in it's looking at what good it does, what it does well? Is it critical? Is it looking at what's not good about it? Or is it rhetorical, seeing multiple perspectives on the same thing? And so we did this chart. And we came up with these. So things like assistant and friend, these are human functional views of AI. They're also, Fahlawi is an Egyptian term for people who BS and pretend that they know stuff that they don't know. So this is a critical view of AI, but it makes it like a human being who behaves in this way, right? And I think Genie might be somewhere in that area between functional and critical, because Genie does do what you want, but it doesn't really usually do exactly what you want. So it's somewhere in that area. Or maybe the Genie's semi-human, I don't know. But there are non-human metaphors like calculator and autocomplete. And the issue with these, I think, is they're looking at the function of AI, but I think the calculator oversimplifies what AI is and oversimplifies the potential and the danger and, you know, the whole thing. So it's one that people use a lot, but I don't think it's a very accurate metaphor. It's useful just in the sense of, oh, well, you can't use a calculator well if you don't know math well, and I think you can't use ChatGPT well if you don't know how to write in the first place. But beyond that, it's not the most useful metaphor, I think. Stochastic parrot is one that is like a semi-human because it's like an animal still, not like an inanimate object. And it's a critical view of AI because it's showing us the statistical way in which it works. So it helps us understand the way machine learning or neural networks work in a way that would make us not as impressed by it. So we think that one's a critical perspective. Two-edged sword, I'm not sure why we put that one as semi-human, honestly, because swords are not human, but I guess because a person is holding it and that's the human who's using it in the two edges, the two ways of using the sword. So that's why it's seen as rhetorical. And then there are other critical views of AI that are non-human, which I don't think any of those came up with you guys today. Fast food was the one my mom gave, and that's what inspired my entire metaphors of AI research. Plastic surgery, and then colonizing loudspeaker, which we, the authors of this paper, came up with because we think that you know, AI actually just takes colonial knowledge and just reproduces that epistemic dominance and then puts it all over the world, and then it just, you know, it's amplifying it more. So we think that if we use something like this with our students, and there are more ideas of how to use this with your students in the paper, this can help us, you know, absorb what's happening in the media and the kind of metaphors that we are exposed to and the kind of hype we're exposed to, and then think about how are we going to use this to understand AI better. So the other metaphor that I've used, and I've put this up on Twitter and Instagram, which is cake making as a metaphor for AI. And so I don't know how many of you are good at baking, but if I'm teaching a class and I ask everybody to bake a cake, those of you who already know how to bake will be happy to bake from scratch. Some people can bake, but they need like a Betty Crocker or some kind of ready-made mix, and then they can just add the eggs or whatever. Some of you don't know how to bake at all, and if I'm expecting like a very elaborate cake, you'll just go buy one because you can't make one yourself. And that's what we do in real life, right? Like not everybody is expected to bake a cake from scratch every single time there's an event where they need a cake. And then sometimes in the US, I was using Twinkies, but people in the UK said Jaffa cakes, like something that's kind of bland and common and available in the supermarket. And you always need to ask yourself when you're teaching something, am I teaching students? Is the learning outcome to learn to bake from scratch, or is the learning outcome to decorate? So if the learning outcome is to decorate the cake, then maybe they can use a Betty Crocker and just decorate it, even a Twinkie and just decorate it if I'm not going to taste it, if it's just about the looks, right? But sometimes it's a school for baking, and so they do need to bake from scratch because someone is actually creating the bake that you buy from the store, right? So, and you need to think about how important is it that you know every single ingredient of what you're doing, or is it okay that some of the ingredients come from wherever? Like in a Betty Crocker box, you're not really sure what quality sugar or flour or baking powder or whatever is in it, right? So these are important questions, and I think in the context of AI, generative AI specifically, and things like ChatGPT, if I'm teaching someone a language or if I'm teaching them to write, I do want them to learn to bake from scratch, and I don't expect them to create the most beautiful or elaborate cake, but they need to know how to do it themselves. If I'm teaching a more advanced writing course, like the ones in my institution, the ones who teach like business writing or technical writing, they're happy for students to use AI to give them a template for like a cover letter or a template for an email or something, and then they edit it. So then that's like using the Betty Crocker box, right? And sometimes what you're actually teaching is not cake making at all. You're teaching people how to organize parties. And if I'm teaching people how to organize parties, I'm happy for them to buy the cake from outside and focus on the decoration of the house and becoming hospitable to people. And the idea is not all about the cake at all. And so sometimes, like for me, if I'm teaching people to write, but I'm asking them to put an image on their blog post, I don't really care. They don't have to draw the image themselves. They're not graphic designers. I'm not teaching graphic design, but they can make DALL-E create an image for them that they use on the blog post as long as the writing is theirs, right? So you can see how like we can play around with these kinds of metaphors to help. And what I did with my students is actually give them this and tell them, think about this course, but they can do this with every course. What is the cake making part that you have to do from scratch, and what are the parts that you can buy ready-made, and that's fine. And buy ready-made, not by buying an assignment from another person, but actually just importing it from somewhere rather than creating it yourself. And so actually, when you think about like image generation, you could get an image from like Pixabay or Unsplash or whatever. That's a ready-made picture that you did nothing to. But you could also edit it on Photoshop, or you could get a DALL-E image, which is unique and you created it yourself with AI, but you didn't create it from scratch. You didn't actually get a pen and paper and draw it, or draw it yourself in Photoshop from scratch. So if you're not teaching graphic design, that's totally fine for most courses. And I think, you know, when we're saying that AI came at us, and it's important to think about this, what Margaret Wheatley is saying is that when chaos erupts, it not only destroys the current structure, it also creates the conditions for new order to emerge. There's a dark night when everything falls apart just before change happens. And these are, I think, there all these changes that happen and make us think about, okay, what is education really for? What are we really teaching? It feels like it's a dark place, and it feels like a lot of things that we thought we could do, we can't do anymore, or things we learned to do during the pandemic now don't always necessarily work. But I think hopefully it helps us think more deeply about why we do what we do and what's really important, that's worth assessing, that's worth showing, that students are learning, and how to make sure a lot of learning actually happens outside of the writing that students give us. A lot of what the learning happens is actually things they do that they learn to do. And writing is just one way of expressing it. And so it's important to focus on those things when we're not teaching writing per se. And I don't know what everybody teaches. I forgot to ask you guys, but. And the other element is to remember that the basic building blocks of life are relationships and not individuals. And that is not something that the AI is going to replace, and the kinds of things we learn by interacting with people, which I mean, I know there's all these things about AI as tutor and interacting with AI, but I think there's always value interacting with real people who have very different personalities and will learn from interacting with people as well. So there was a recent student paper with the students' perspectives on AI literacy, and some of the things they said is that it helps overcome writer's block, which some of you have said. Students could use it to modify text, summarize readings, or assist with writing. And my students have said, when we were setting the AI guidelines for my institution, they said, I think if I use AI to help me summarize a reading that I find too difficult, I don't need to report that to the teacher because I'm not copy pasting that summary into my writing. I'm just using it on my side. And so we're very clear that this, as long as you're not submitting something with AI in it, you don't have to say anything to the teacher. It's just helping you understand something. It's like looking up in a dictionary, you know, but just a lot more advanced. Of course, translation, and ChatGPT's translation is pretty good for some languages. Arabic is always not very good with translation in all the tools that translate, but. And then there's this acting as a tutor, which I've seen a lot of people talk about, and I find really problematic because of how often it will make things up to someone who's learning something new. So I'm not really sure why people keep saying this. And I realize it works for some things, but how's the student going to know that it's not going to make things up in this thing, you know? And of course, using it to edit writing, to write correct grammar and spell check, I think these are things that most people would agree is fine. Is an okay use of it, and is pretty good at these things. And we've been doing, you know, smaller versions of that for years now. And translation is something we've been done for a long time, but it just needs to be repeated, like, or checked, you know. But checking about the ethics is always important, right? And we know that other artificial intelligence that we've known for years, from YouTube recommendations to facial recognition technology, has been racist and ableist and sexist. And so there's large language models like ChatGPT are built on similar technologies. It's going to do the same thing. And I'm curious what you would include in AI literacies if you're already thinking about this kind of thing. So that's another Mentimeter question. So I'll share that. And see what you have in mind. Ability to fact check, for sure. Ethical use of AI, yeah. And what that means, I think, will be different depending on the context, but I agree. Objectivity, cultural appropriation, academic integrity, guide to critical reflection, how to question sources, coding, critical thinking, knowledge of strengths, weaknesses, and institutional ground rules, yes. Questioning, use for program coding, fact-checking, second opinions, ethics and bias, ethics of information use, brainstorming, prompt engineering, yes. Critical thinking, what it doesn't do, keeping work authentic to the student, understanding of how generative AI works and lack of intelligence. AI is not intelligent, critical thinking, background knowledge, reflection. Differentiating between sources of information and how to use them. Critical thinking is coming up a lot. Brainstorming is coming up a little. Bias is turning up also. Writing style. Group thinking with different AIs. That's an interesting one. Flawed but always being developed. Academic integrity, again, is showing up a bit. Copyright, accuracy. Prompt writing is showing up a lot. Bringing diversity into teaching. And who put the information in, that's a really important one. Yeah, and how to use it appropriately is coming up a lot as well. Case studies of how to use and not use AI. Understanding bias limitations, yes. Tailoring AI use to the task, that's a good one. Resistance to flattery, that's an interesting one. I don't know what you mean, but it's cool. What sources are being used and who do they represent and benefit? Great. Validation of reference, information sources, awesome. So these are a lot of the things that I already have. And I will move to the next question, which I'm not going to ask right now, but you can keep thinking about it as I move on to my next slide. And I have to reshare. Okay, so what I have, so there's a paper by someone whose name I cannot pronounce. It's NG. If someone can explain to me how to say this name, I'll be very happy to know. And they're talking about 4 aspects of AI literacy, which to me just sound like mostly like Bloom's taxonomy, right? Know and understand, use and apply, evaluate and create. And then there's the ethical issues side. But my model is these things. So I think it's important for students to know how it works, which some of you said, like the makings, like how do you make something like this? It's very important for me that they know about bias and inequalities, and I'll talk about all these things in more detail. It's important to think about the ethics and definitely prompt engineering, and then figuring out when is it appropriate to use it, where and why. So I am how generative AI works. I'm a computer scientist originally before I did a PhD in education. And so my undergraduate thesis was a neural network. So I totally understand this idea of machine learning and how it works. But I think it's actually really shocking to understand how machines do that. And so I play with my students this game called Quick Draw from Google. And I don't know if anybody has played this game before. You can play it on your phone, like just directly from the web, or you can download the app. And it works in different languages. And it's basically you trying to draw something, and it tries to guess what you're drawing. And what I try to explain to students is nobody, like when it tells you to draw a bat, it hasn't been told what a bat is or what it looks like. It's learning from people drawing it. And one of the interesting things about a word like a bat is that a bat is both an animal, the flying mammal, or it's a bat as in a cricket bat or a baseball bat, right? And it understands both because half the people go this way, half the people go that way. And we keep playing this a little bit, and then I show them, even in that process of it learning, they can get to see how other people drew things. And when they get something wrong and you see how other people drew it, you see, oh, the majority of people, for example, funnily enough, draw the guitar angled in a particular way. So when you draw it angled in another way, it doesn't recognize it just because of that. And I also show them a little bit of bias on it. So for example, what it understands, when it asks you to draw a hospital, it assumes that you will put either a letter H or a cross on the hospital. But people who aren't in English-speaking countries that don't have Latin text where hospital is written with an H, or in countries that are not Christian, don't have a cross on their hospitals. But it's just the majority of people who play Quick Draw are from probably Anglo, but maybe not necessarily Anglo, but just generally Latin text Christian countries. And so it just expects that. It sort of explains a lot about machine learning in a very, very quick way. And then I show them how Google is using that technology to do another app called AutoDraw. And AutoDraw actually lets you doodle something, and then it tries to create a less messy icon type picture out of what you were trying to do. And it's really cool, actually, seeing that combination of those two things. And then if you want them to really know a little bit more, like in a more scientific way, like how does AI work? How do large language models work? The AI pedagogy project provided by Harvard's MetaLab has an LLM tutorial and starter kit, and they're useful for both teachers and students. But what's really cool about the tutorial is that it also has like an embedded ChatGPT. So even if you don't want your students to create an account on ChatGPT, they can still use this, because some people have ethical concerns with just the privacy policies, right? And so you can let them try this. The other thing is, once they understand how AI works, I want them to understand the inequities in AI globally before they even start. Egypt didn't have official access to ChatGPT until very recently. Like, we had to use someone's number in the US or Europe or something to be able to get an account, or to go through something like po.com and go around it. And so that's a thing. Like, there were several countries that didn't have access to AI at all. And we're not even talking now about people who don't have access to internet or electricity. We're just talking about regular countries that generally would have access to everything, but they don't. And it wasn't that our country was blocking it for censorship. It was ChatGPT, OpenAI themselves just decided not to make it accessible to some countries. Same with Claude, for example. But then also the way AI has generally been trained tends to reflect historical biases. We know this. We know that facial recognition has discriminated against Black populations, and then it's been used in the criminal justice system. It's done the same kind of thing. And Ruha Benjamin calls this engineered inequality. Like you're just letting AI technologies create inevitably oppressive and disadvantaging outcomes for certain populations. In a society, you're just reproducing injustice. And we need to question, especially those of us from the global south, like what say do we have in determining what becomes part of this corpus that feeds the output? So when we're going to use AI, it's just reproducing this kind of knowledge, and it appears as if it's neutral, but it's not. And there's also forms of techno-ableism and things like using eye tracking and voice recognition, gait analysis. These will not work for people who don't conform to physical features. When people were using algorithmic proctoring during the pandemic, people who were neurodivergent, like who have autism or ADHD, their movements were considered a lot of times to be as if they were cheating. And indigenous people as well want to push back against some of this because it's removed from the needs of people and land, right? The push for AI goes away from that. So we know that they're biased data sets, mostly white Western English, probably male too, because a lot of the internet is like that. It's inaccessible in some locations until recently. Reproduces oppression we've known for years. And we've known search engines, of course, and YouTube recommendations. And it's also extractive because it learns from users. It takes our data, probably took permission, but we didn't realize that because nobody reads the terms of service very deeply, right? And another issue is that like a lot of teachers want to use AI detectors, which are completely unreliable, but worse, they discriminate more against non-native speakers, thinking that they are AI. So a non-native speaker probably writes in a more formulaic manner because their English isn't as fluent. And then these AI detectors think that they're AI. So you're more likely to accuse a student of using AI when they haven't, if they're a non-native speaker. And I think one of the issues that came up early on is the process for OpenAI to create an AI tool that was more like not offensive and not violent and not producing that kind of content was the way they trained it with humans, right? They had contract workers in Kenya and other countries in Africa, but the ones in Kenya especially, they said in the process of filtering a lot of the violent content from DALL-E and from ChatGPT to make them more cleaner for us and less offensive for us, these people were, first of all, very underpaid, but also suffered a lot of mental health issues because of this. And then OpenAI did not support them after that. And so this is like, to me, a wolf in sheep's clothing, because producing something that's supposed to be like, oh, look at this polite AI, because before that, when AI used to work and learn from the internet, it ended up being very much like the internet and used a lot of swear words and violence and so on. So to create one that isn't, the process itself was not ethical because you harmed a lot of you exploited labor in the process. So this exploitation of human labor in that way is one thing. There's also a lot of intellectual property right violations in the sense that, especially with the visual AIs, there's a lot of artists whose work got appropriated. And also when you think about it, what ChatGPT produces is an amalgamation of a lot of things that it's learned from all over the place, and it'll never tell you where it got it from. Even the ones like Bard and Bing and Perplexity that do give you sources, they're not always very accurate about the sources. They'll sometimes create a real source that doesn't really point to the thing that it's saying it's pointing to. And sometimes what it's doing, it's almost paraphrasing one particular person's thought and not telling you that it's that person's thought. And I'm thinking about not only the intellectual property right violation in the sense of, are these people losing money, but also the plagiarism aspect of the learner. I'm not saying the student is plagiarizing because they're using ChatGPT or whatever. I mean, they would if they didn't say they got it from there. But the problem is when they cite ChatGPT, what's really the ideas in it? They're not ChatGPT's ideas. They're another human being's ideas that ChatGPT synthesized and gave the student. So the student has no scholarly they don't know the scholarly journey or the knowledge building journey of the ideas that they're getting out of ChatGPT. So they have no idea who said this and where they came from and what's their political inclination, what country are they from, what do they do? You know, when you hear something coming out of it, you don't even know. Like, for example, white supremacy culture is a very specific term that very specific person, Tima Okun, has been working on with someone else, but she kept developing it on her own. And when you ask ChatGPT about it, it'll say what it is. And until very recently, it wouldn't cite her at all. And you need to know, is this a white person? Is this a person of color? Where are they located, in the US or somewhere else? So, you know, all those things. And you don't get that link anymore because you're not reading the original source. You're reading ChatGPT's paraphrase of it, you know? There's also the harm to the environment, they said, to water, to climate change, and the process of all of these large it's a large language model using a lot of data. And I would look at Leon Furz's work on teaching AI ethics. If you haven't seen that already, that's useful to use in classes as well. And when we think about the writing aspect of what ChatGPT is, and one of the reasons why a lot of what it produces is similar to what we ask our students to do, is that a lot of times we're asking our learners to write like robots. They're just following scripts and they're worrying less about the content, and they do things like vaguely look like an essay. So I don't know if this is the case where you are, but where I am, I see that a lot. So robots are actually good at writing like robots because that's what we've been training our students to do. So just always thinking about any assignment that I used to do that I ended up getting that kind of content from students is probably an assignment that I should stop doing because ChatGPT is going to do it. And it also then, for non-native speakers especially, and I know you guys are in the UK, but you probably have a lot of non-native speakers as your students. And if they're going to start using then things like ChatGPT, then they're going to lose their own voice. As a non-native speaker of English, it should be okay to write not like a native speaker and still be understandable. And I think that's going to be a problem as we start using these tools a lot more. Everybody's going to start to sound like a native speaker, and then all the Englishes that are outside the norm are not going to be. I mean, I know that when ChatGPT, they try to prompt it to write like an African American, for example, it doesn't do a very good job. Although my boss and I did tell it to write like a non-native speaker, and it did that, and it made the kinds of mistakes that a lot of Arabs make in English. So that was an interesting experiment. And so I think it is very important. Of course, we talked about like prompt engineering was there. So definitely you want to teach students how to, if they're going to use AI, how to make it do the best possible thing it can do that they need it to do. Because maybe in the job market beyond university, they may need to use it. But they also need to decide when and where and why to use AI and when they shouldn't be using AI. So I was asking, what's generative AI good for? So that was the question that I have for you. So I'm going to go to Mentimeter and see what you guys have said. Okay, generating feedback, improving tone, ideas, templates for agendas. Cheating, generating pictures, outlining what you want, expressing concept or idea to aid understanding. Inspiration, supporting creative processes, fact-checking, not fact-checking, proofreading, yes. Coding, brainstorming, and somebody saying still being debated, I agree. Scaffolding, brainstorming, food waste. Grammar check, time saving, aid memoir for experts, early ideas getting started, starting you off with a structure. Yeah, so lots of people talking about kickstarting ideas and writing, summarizing stuff for sure, templates, and yeah, I agree. Yes. Reflective thinking, quick answers when you don't have enough time to spend. Yeah, because a lot of things that you get from AI, you'd get if you did a Google search as well, but you may need to like read 4 or 5 things until you get it, and it just gets it to you a lot quicker, usually. Okay. Creating learn IMSM, so like what, junk? Grunt work, yeah, my students used to say the word grunt work actually. Scut work or grunt work, yeah. Okay, last minute jobs, yeah, getting over writer's block, summarizing articles. Okay, can I move on to the what it's bad for? Because I want to talk about that too. What's it bad for? Yeah. Bad at critical thinking and creativity. So it's very interesting that a lot of people will use it for brainstorming and generating ideas, but we still think it's not good at creativity because it's only going to reproduce stuff that's seen before in maybe new formats, but not totally new things, I think. Accuracy is definitely not good at accuracy, right? It's not good. It's bad for like plagiarism, cheating, procrastination, that kind of thing. False information, the accuracy stuff, again, encouraging laziness, that's really important. I think it's not good at reflective writing. Of course, if you're going to reflect properly, meaning making a connection with your own life, it's not going to do that for you. Differentiating out of the box, yeah, it won't go out of the box. Promoting conspiracy theories, it's not good at that, or it does do that, right? It could do that. I think you're saying it's bad because it would do that. Critical analysis, I agree, it won't really do that for you. IP issues, definitely. Loss of creativity, authenticity, again, that's happening, it's coming up a lot. Stepping stones of learning, because students need those stepping stones. You go back to the crochet post where you need to suffer a little bit to learn, and it's okay, and it's hard, and you won't get it right. But if AI gets it close to right, it looks like it's getting it right, you don't go through those processes and you become lazy, as someone else was saying. Teaching self-discipline, yes. Not demonstrate learning. Why are machines making art while we do hard labor? Yes, thank you. Accepting ideas at face value. Yeah, people may start doing that. And people already do that with the internet. And I'm not even talking young people, I'm talking grown people will take anything from like social media sometimes and believe it, right? Will limit ambition, issues with human agency. I need to be really careful with that. Illegitimate shortcuts, yeah, like making the cake from a box when you're supposed to bake it from scratch. Sometimes there's value in learning from scratch. And like going back to the crochet thing, I can easily just buy a scarf. I don't have to learn to crochet, but if I crochet, I can make it whatever color I want, whatever texture I want. Someone has to be the one creating them in the first place, right? Poetry, it does poetry, depends how good you are at poetry. So that's it again. Like if I'm not teaching poetry and I just want a poem to do something with it, I don't mind using it. But if I'm a good poet, it's not going to be as good as I am, I hope. For quite some time, I hope. Anti-consumerism, that's going to be a problem. Yeah, having such shortcuts removes incentive to develop skills, I agree. And it can block critical reflection. Yeah, it can't critically evaluate information. It just, whatever it does. Some people are talking about replacing people. Somebody said frogging. Okay, that was funny. It's not good at frogging. That's true. Own voice, truth reflection. Own voice is so important, right? Yeah. And it can stop people who are young, who still don't have the critical thinking to know. It can stop them from thinking for themselves. I'm seeing this threat of radicalization. That's an interesting one to see, but the internet has done that, I think, and I can imagine how AI can do that as well. Yeah, okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to share a little bit of what people have been writing about this, but clearly you're all already there. So I don't know how long you've been talking about AI today. So I don't know if you've seen this image by Alexander Tulkanov. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but it was on a UNESCO document that I found it. And it's just a question, I think, for students to ask themselves. It's a really nice flowchart, which is, does it matter if the output is true? If it doesn't matter, the output is true, it's totally fine to use ChatGPT. So when you're like brainstorming for nothing and it's just for you and whatever, it's safe to use it. But then if it's important that the output is actually accurate and real, and then you have to ask yourself, do I have enough knowledge to actually assess and verify? And most students don't, so they shouldn't be using ChatGPT for that. But if you're an expert on a thing and you're using ChatGPT, you could probably check if it's correct or not. And then can you actually take responsibility for it? Because we know the stories of lawyers who used it and then it produced cases that didn't actually exist. And I don't know what was wrong with these lawyers. I don't know if they actually have a degree in law and they could just take that output and not really check to see if these cases actually exist. So even then, it's like possible to use it, but you just really need to be sure to verify what's in it. And so Shah and Bender have this preprint about comparing information retrieval systems or information access systems, and they're talking about discriminative ones, like what Google is, or what any search engine is more discriminative, right? It's going to be fast. It's not going to be personalized to exactly what you want, what you're asking for, but it's going to be pretty transparent about where it got it from, right? And it's not very novel because it depends on what's available and how it ranks the information, depending on whatever algorithm it uses for ranking. But it has an algorithm for ranking, right? But generative AI, it depends on what it's been pre-trained on. So whatever, if it hasn't been trained on the thing that we're looking for, it's not going to find it. And then it's more interactive. They both interact, but it's more interactive. But it's more personal, right? ChatGPT will give you exactly what you want. Sometimes they'll say, produce a table of whatever it is I'm looking for. Like, I'm interested in tennis, for example. I want the top 10 tennis players and these particular stats in this particular way. It'll give me that. If I had to do this on my own, I'd have to spend a lot more time on Google to find the different pieces of information and get them together, right? But it's not transparent about where it got any of it from. So that's important for us to think about. And it also explains a little bit why sometimes people go to ChatGPT instead of, or similar, instead of going to the web. And the issue is, like, you have things like Bard and Bing that will give you sources, but I've been discovering lately that it's not very accurate about the sources all the time. This paper comes out of the UK. I don't know if you guys have seen it, and I think there's a little bit snippet of it published in The Guardian about bullshit. And the idea of bullshit is to compare, you know, BS is what humans do, bullshit, and then hallucinations is what the AI models do. But bullshit is when you take chatbot generated content that's not grounded in truth, and then you as a human uncritically use it for communication and decision making tasks. And so those are things I think we need to teach our students to try to avoid. And my time is almost up, actually. So I'm not going to go through this, but you should go read that paper. And thinking about what do we do as educators, and I think encouraging transparency culture where students will share with us how they've used AI in as much detail as makes sense for our courses is important. And Sarah Elaine Eaton from Canada, who's an expert on academic integrity, thinks that we're approaching a post-plagiarism society, and that our definitions of plagiarism will change over time. And I'm going to move quickly through this and just say that we can approach this whole thing in a compassionate learning design approach where you give learners more agency in how, so that they can think critically, let them learn about their critical AI literacy, figure out what needs to be done with them. Like, think with your students and allow them to have more agency in deciding of whether AI is going to be useful for them or not, or understanding why they sometimes take shortcuts rather than deciding for them. So if you're going to do guidelines as an institution or as a classroom, involve them in that process. And here are some resources. Again, you can take the slides from Tim later. All of these places, the AI Pedagogy Project, Exploring AI Pedagogy, 101 Creative Uses for AI in Education, Learn with AI Toolkit, TextGen Ed, these are all spaces where other educators have put their assignments for you to take a look at, and some of them even have the reflections of the teacher about, like, when I did this in class, this is what happened. So you can think about how to integrate it into your class, and a lot of them are also divided by discipline, like the AI Pedagogy Project will say, oh, this is for use in journalism, this is for use in a writing course, this is for use in a politics course, you know, so you can think about that as well. And I think it could be also useful to involve your students in speculative futures type fiction about AI, depending on their field of study, like how do you think AI might positively or negatively affect your profession. So I'm going to stop here and ask you what is a key takeaway for you. We'll go back to Mentimeter for that. And then I'll take your questions, and feel free to take the mic for the questions, or to, I'll give you also a space on Mentimeter to ask, or you can ask in the chat if you're here with me on Teams. Are we good with time? Do we have like 7 minutes? I think we have 7 minutes. All right, key takeaway about giving students agency. Pros and cons of AI, focus on ethics. Involving students in discussions. Yeah, rapid speed of developments, need to learn a lot more about AI. Even Bard, I said Bard is now called Gemini, like 3 days, as of 3 days ago or something, or 5 days ago, they started calling it Gemini. It was a very funny, this stuff is moving really fast. And understanding limitations of AI and the biases, look up current sources, complexity. One of the very funny things that AI, like DALL-E, doesn't do very well in, or Stable Diffusion, I think, it's not good at flags of countries. I mean, that's very basic information, but it just messes them up. Just the beginning, yeah. Involve students in the process, depends on context, situation, need to evaluate why we use AI. Involving students, it has its place, should be used, shouldn't be used exclusively, definitely. Giving learners agency, okay. Nice. About teaching students to use it appropriately. more playing with the available. Yeah, we need to play with it so that we understand what students are doing and what people will be doing in the job market also afterwards, right? It can be integrated, must be taught to students, more initiative to engage more. Yeah, okay, good overview. Cake making analogy, glad you like it. More excited, okay. More case studies, yes. Skeptical, still very skeptical. You should be skeptical. We should all stay skeptical. It's very impressive at the beginning, and then you realize that it's not. Like at the beginning, you think it's not going to be impressive. Then it's impressive. Then you realize it's. You should stay skeptical for sure. All right. I'm seeing more about the cake again. Working with students again. All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to the questions. Beware of botched and biases and stuff, but let's move on to, I will read these again after this is over.
Maha, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm just wary of the time. I don't want to keep you beyond the hour. Thank you so much for your time to put aside to talk to us today. It's been fascinating and really thought-provoking. There's still a lot of ideas there that I want to go away and think about that you've discussed this morning. So I just want to ask everybody here, sorry, we've only got one microphone.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much, Tim, for the invite.
Thank you so much.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye.